Fox News Alert, we have brand new details on yesterday's terror rampage in New York City. As we learned, the attack was weeks in the planning and carried out in the name of ISIS. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. Police revealing the driver in the deadly attack was already known to them, while President Trump says he will work with Congress to end an immigration program which allowed the suspect to enter this country.
We have to get tough, we have to get smart, we have to do what's right to protect our citizens. We will never waver in the defense of our beloved country, ever. And we'll never, ever forget the beautiful lives that have been taken from us. That was a horrible event, and we have to stop it, and we have to stop it cold.
We have live Fox team coverage. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has more on the investigation, but we begin with Bill Hemmer at the scene of the attack in Lower Manhattan. Bill, have police released a timeline now?
Dana, good afternoon. A very specific timeline indeed, and they caution us they're in the very early stages of this investigation. But already they have put together the following. At 2:06, right around this time yesterday, 24 hours ago, is when the truck was rented in Passaic, New Jersey. The suspect then entered the island of Manhattan at 2:43 p.m., so about 35 minutes later. At 3:04 p.m., 58 minutes after he left the rental station at that Home Depot, that's when he jumped the lane, entered the bike lane, and started mowing down people, which resulted in the deaths of 8 and the injured of more than 11 people. At 3:08, so we're now 4 minutes past that point, 911 calls come in. 3 police officers visiting a local high school respond immediately, and Officer Brian Nash fires the shot that downs the terrorist and puts him down on the ground here in Lower Manhattan. Multiple knives found in the car. The pickup truck that I mentioned there, and Dana, as you mentioned there, for a while now, he had been planning this, said being planning for a number of weeks. There was literature found inside the car suggesting he did it for ISIS and followed to a T. That's a quote from the New York Police Department here as to what ISIS would say and describe and encourage their own followers to do online. That was all new information as they pieced this timeline together from 24 hours ago.
And was he known to police, the suspect?
Doesn't appear to be. We believe the driver's license he had to get that car was valid, but we have no way to verify that just yet. However, it has been said so far that he was not the subject of any police investigation. He was not the subject of any FBI investigation, but they will not rule out what they call the connectivity he has to others who have been subjects to the investigation. And part of that investigation, too, Dana, goes with all the rental agencies throughout the New York City area, of which there are about 150. They were put on notice starting about 2 years ago after the attacks in Berlin and Nice, France, to be on the lookout. And if there is someone who is considered suspicious who wants to rent a vehicle, notify them. As of 2 weeks ago, all those agencies were still being, well, they had contact with them by way of the New York Police Department. So there was an active program underway. But what sort of questions they had them ask is still a bit unclear so far at this point in the investigation.
So we're in the city, New York, that never stops. What do you think is next?
This intersection's buzzing, has been all day. Life goes on here. And I'm just noticing to my right, Dana, if you go about 150 yards, that's where that pickup truck is still parked now, the rental pickup truck. But the traffic in the northbound lane of West Street has now resumed as of a few moments ago. So the city's moving yet again. But on Sunday, there is a massive event. That's the New York City Marathon. It happens on Sunday morning, covers 26 miles through 5 different boroughs. Police have already said if you're riding the subway and public transportation, you're going to see more police officers out there. We're going to have more canine units out. We're going to have more heavy weapons units that will be activated as of now. So New York's ramping up as only New York can. We'll try and keep it safe. We'll see what we get in the coming days, Dana.
All right, Bill Hemmer, I'm so glad you were able to join us. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And we are learning more about the suspect in yesterday's deadly attack. Sources tell Fox News he had close ties to people already on law enforcement's radar. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live in Washington with more. Catherine.
Thanks, Dana. In the last hour, Fox News obtained new photos of the suspect's apartment complex that is virtually on the doorstep of New Jersey's Omar Mosque and within blocks of where the 9/11 hijackers lived in Paterson, New Jersey. A former federal investigator with Pent Bomb, the code name for the 9/11 file, tells Fox what troubles him most about this case is how close the mosque that was known to 9/11 investigators and the subject of multiple leads after the attack that killed nearly 3,000 Americans is to the suspect's home. In this second photo, you'll see a brick building there on the left, and that's the apartment of the suspect with the mosque in the background. And for some additional context, Fox News first reported on the significance of this area 5 years ago. This is blocks from where the 9/11 hijacker and ringleader Mohammed Atta and the Muscle hijackers finalized the plot for 2001. And based on preliminary evidence, we learned this morning that the suspect planned the attack for weeks, left handwritten notes, as Bill mentioned, at the scene in Arabic with symbols and words expressing his belief that the Islamic State would endure forever. Fox News reported earlier today that the suspect had connections to individuals who were already known to federal law enforcement. And New York's Deputy Commissioner for Counterterrorism fleshed out some of those details earlier today.
Mr. Saipov has never been the subject of an NYPD Intelligence Bureau investigation, nor has he been the subject of an FBI investigation. It appears he will have some connectivity to individuals who were the subjects of investigation, though he himself was not.
We're told law enforcement is scrubbing the suspect's electronics, and there is evidence already that he was searching online for ISIS instructions for using trucks as weapons. Dana.
Catherine, has anyone officially claimed responsibility for the attack, and does that even matter?
Well, first point, no one has given an official claim of responsibility. And to your second point, the bottom line is that this discussion of whether someone is self-radicalized or directed by ISIS operatives overseas really is of little consequence anymore, because what we see in these cases is that they get the inspiration online and they have some kind of support network. They talk about this suspect as being a lone wolf. I think based on what we know now and his contacts with others who are under federal investigation, I think that's a little misleading, because really it takes more than one person to pull off any kind of attack, and they're so difficult to prevent.
All right, Catherine Herridge, thank you so much for joining us. So joining us now is Bill Stanton. He's a former New York City police officer. He's author of the Anti-Terror Checklist and a safety and security expert. Thank you for being here today. You got called down to the scene yesterday.
Yes, I was called down.
What did you witness?
Today. Well, it was mass pandemonium, but I will say the first responders, our NYPD, FBI, fire department did a phenomenal job at organizing, keeping the peace, and collecting the evidence.
What would you say to people who, there's tourists everywhere, the city, I walk everywhere, and ever since these vehicular attacks started, it is on my mind. I don't worry about it all the time. I don't change my patterns of behavior, but should I?
Simple phrase: be prepared, not paranoid. It's good that you have these things on your mind, Dana. You told me how sometimes you walk to work and you're aware of your surroundings. What you don't want to have is headphones on, your face in your not-so-smartphone, I call it, and be unaware, being your little bubble. You want to expand that bubble to your surroundings. So if you see something coming, it's called situational awareness, and then go what's called critical thinking mode. You see a car coming your way, you're aware of it. Hopefully you'll be able to get out in time.
Let's talk a little bit about the first responders, because Ryan Nash, who was the officer that shot the suspect and brought him down, he was actually on a call for something totally unrelated. He was looking for an emotionally disturbed individual, and he's there. So what kind of training does it take to get somebody to have that sort of quick reaction to prevent further tragedy?
Well, it takes a lot of training. The NYPD supplies that, but it's also incumbent upon the individual himself. Officer Nash, what he did to show that discipline, throwing only 2 rounds, not emptying his weapon, and having the presence of mind to approach and look at his surroundings as well, is unbelievable. It's a credit to the NYPD and to the man himself.
Well, I'm curious, because he could not have been able to tell that the weapons were not real.
That's right.
Okay, so why did he... Do you think that he was meaning to shoot to kill, or was he shooting to injure so that we could capture him and get the intelligence?
Well, this is important to clarify. Law enforcement does not shoot to kill per se. It's shoot to stop. Main body mass. That happens to be where all the main organs are. So the fact that he stopped with the adrenaline pumping, et cetera, he showed extreme discipline in throwing 2 rounds, not more. As I said, not emptying his whole magazine.
Extremely difficult for law enforcement to be able to track down individuals who do something that lots of people do. They rent trucks from a store to move things, and it's how can they be held responsible, I guess, is the question, for ferreting out all of these possibilities if you're going to have that many lone wolves?
You can't. We all don't have an Officer Nash, I wish we did, over our shoulder. So it's incumbent upon us as citizens to duly deputize ourselves, if you will. If we see something, say something, well, there are indicators along the way. And if you see someone acting funny, well, keep your eye on that person. Don't immediately think, oh, well, he or she isn't going to do anything. As we see these people, when they just decide to snap, it's virtually impossible to stop them.
What about, a last question for you, when Catherine was talking about him belonging to the mosque in Paterson, New Jersey, and the history that that mosque has, does that give you any further indication that this might be actually more widespread?
Well, we don't know for sure, but come on. There are things that are said, he may have been spouting some rhetoric, and it would have been better if the person would have raised their hand, called 911, called a law enforcement agency, and agencies need to follow up and question. There are ways that you could speak to someone and get indicators, the same way Israel does it at airports, where they get indicators if they're being deceptive or not. That's what we need to look for.
All right, Bill Stanton, I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
All right, as the investigation into the attack continues, President Trump voicing concerns about the visa program that allowed the suspect into the United States in the first place. And he's pointing fingers at Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer. Another Democrat, Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland, will join me later.
Mr. President?
I would certainly consider that, yes.
Are you considering that now, sir?
I would certainly consider that.
Are you?
Send him to Gitmo. I would certainly consider that, yes.
President Trump raising the possibility of sending the New York terror suspect to Guantanamo Bay. The president also saying he wants Homeland Security to step up what he calls the extreme vetting program. Joining me now is Ohio Republican Congressman Jim Jordan, a member of the House Oversight Committee and the House Freedom Caucus, and your first appearance on the Daily Briefing. It's good to have you here.
Yeah, good to be with you, Dana.
I'll just open it up and give your reaction to the terrorist attack yesterday.
Well, I mean, first of all, our hearts go out to the families who were impacted. Again, I think it just illustrates how evil these folks are. There's been a series of these across Europe and now here, unfortunately, in the United States, this kind of tactic. So I think the president's right. This guy deserves the full penalty. He deserves to die, this terrorist, but the full impact of the law should be against this terrorist.
Yeah, and there have been 34 vehicular attacks since ISIS asked their followers to go forward with that, so they've come to the United States. Let me play for you a soundbite from Senator Schumer reacting to President Trump earlier today and get your reaction.
Okay.
President Bush, in a moment of national tragedy, understood the meaning of his high office and sought to bring our country together. President Trump, where is your leadership? I'm calling on the president to rescind his proposed cuts to this vital anti-terrorism funding immediately.
So just last week, the House Republicans passed their budget. Would you be willing to restore those cuts that he's talking about?
Well, I got to look and see exactly what Mr. Schumer's talking about. What I do think needs to happen is, and the president talked about this, and Senator Cotton and Senator Perdue have this bill, is we do need to change this lottery visa program, this visa lottery program, which is how this terrorist got in our country. That needs to change, and that's one of the key elements of Senator Cotton's legislation. The president has endorsed that. I feel like it's the right thing to do, the right kind of legislation to pass, and I think it's just good common sense, and the American people agree with it. So I do agree with that's what needs to be the focus as we move forward and try to better deal with this terrorist threat.
Time to revisit that. I agree. On tax reform, you expect that you're still on track to introduce this bill tomorrow?
Yeah, that's what we hear. It'd been nice if we'd had it today, but look, we do have a framework. We know what the rates are going to be on the corporate rate, the small business rate. We have a good idea what the personal rates are going to be, but let's get the details and let's have the debate so we can get this done for the American people. I think it's coming out tomorrow. That's what we hear, and let's hope that's the case.
Do you feel like there's more unity now with the Republicans? I know that former Speaker Boehner referred to you, I don't know, perhaps affectionately in the Politico article as a legislative terrorist, but I assume that things are better. It might not have been affectionately. I'm trying to soft pedal it. But I wanted to ask you if you think there's more unity now that the Freedom Caucus agreeing with this budget and now with tax reform and wanting to get it off the table quickly.
And the Freedom Caucus has never been the problem on tax reform. And what we've been arguing, and it's moving in this direction, is to abandon this crazy revenue neutral concept, this revenue neutral idea, which is Washington speak for keep the tax burden the same, just shift around who pays what. In that scenario, who always loses are the middle class families across this country. So what we've said is letting people keep more of their money is not a cost to the government. Let's just design a tax code that actually cuts taxes, that actually simplifies the code, and one that's conducive to producing economic growth and job creation. Let's just focus on those principles, design a good tax code, and then let's deal with spending. That's the kind of approach we in the Freedom Caucus have been pushing forward. We're not going to be the problem on this tax reform bill. We know it needs to get done for the American people.
Do you support the idea or the concept of keeping that top rate for the highest earners in America?
I want to see the overall package. What I'm not for is raising people's taxes. I don't think we should be increasing anyone's taxes. We should be lowering the tax burden, creating a code conducive to economic growth, and one that is simpler, flatter, fairer. So that should be the parameters and the principles that we ascribe to. And let's see what the bill does tomorrow. I think it's going to do all that. And when it does, I think you're going to see strong support from the Freedom Caucus, but more importantly, strong support from the American people in the Republican conference.
My last question to you, based on that, if that rate for highest earners is kept where it is, and so the wealthy are probably going to end up paying more, do you think that you'll get some Democratic support so that this ends up being a bipartisan bill?
I don't know they're going to get any Democrat support in the House. You may in the Senate. But I don't sense that in the House right now, and I'm not exactly sure what we are going to do with that 39.6% rate. Again, I don't think it should go up. I don't think we should be raising taxes on anyone. That's not what's conducive to, in my mind, to economic growth. So let's not do that.
All right. Well, we'll see what's in the bill tomorrow. Jim Jordan, thank you for being here with us.
You bet, Dana.
The suspect in the attack pledging his allegiance to ISIS, how the terror group is using the internet to expand its message, even as it suffers losses on the battlefield. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo weighing in on Sunday's New York City Marathon, which will go on as scheduled, but with extra security.
We'll have federal forces, FBI forces, National Guard, NYPD, barriers, every precaution that can be taken will be taken. But let's be honest, you can never 100% police against these rental car, truck, driving into a crowd situations.
Marathon organizers say that some pre-race events tonight are being canceled out of respect for the victims. ISIS losing ground in Syria and Iraq, but waging war on the rest of the world. A terrorist conducting a deadly attack in New York City yesterday, using a rented truck as a deadly weapon to run over pedestrians and bikers. It's a plot encouraged by ISIS online.
He appears to have followed almost exactly to a T the instructions that ISIS has put out in its social media channels before, with instructions to their followers on how to carry out such an attack.
Joining me now, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Waltz, retired Green Beret commander, former counterterrorism advisor to Vice President Cheney, author of Warrior Diplomat, and a Fox News contributor and a friend, of course. Michael, I just want to show you something from the Center for the Counter-Extremism Project. It says in 2014, ISIS issued a call to kill non-believers with a rock or slaughter him with a knife or run him over with your car. There have been 34 attacks since then. These are low-tech attacks. They've killed 196 people and injured more than 1,049 others since 2006. How is this all related to what we've been talking about in the past couple of weeks about Green Berets and other special forces out there in the world trying to prevent the radical Islamic ideology from growing?
Well, it's growing around the world, Dana. And, you know, I think part of this is that we are seeing the chickens come home to roost from the last 8 years of under the Obama administration of a passive approach to these sanctuaries, from the withdrawal in Iraq to the almost withdrawal in Afghanistan, where 20 of the 40 where 20 of 40 of the world's terrorist groups reside, to a completely passive approach to Syria and letting ISIS grow and fester and grow into a state, to even today, ISIS just took over a whole city in the Philippines, and we have special forces there helping them retake that city, to the Navy SEAL raid in Libya, to Niger, and where the Green Berets are helping locals provide security for themselves. It is all connected. It's also connected to some of the domestic debates here, such as the 702 authorization for NSA to be able to conduct the surveillance it needs. And then finally, something that a lot of people aren't talking about, but I just want to re-raise the name Edward Snowden, who basically told the world and all of these terrorist groups which encryption methods, which apps, which software that our intelligence community cannot penetrate or is having a hard time penetrate. And guess what? That's what they're using to conduct these attacks all over Europe and now in the United States.
But what would Intel officials try to do to stop somebody like this? So this is a man who came here in 2010 from Uzbekistan. This is not on the list of any of the countries that we've talked about in the past, I don't know, year probably. He's been here 7 years. He's actually integrated. He has a job. He has a wife. He has children. And yet he still becomes radicalized because of online activity. So how do we get on top of that? Because you could eliminate ISIS's battlefield in Syria, but the battlefield online is basically it's endless.
Well, so we can only play so much defense. So let's just be honest. I mean, we've talked about the visa program. We can't, which I do think needs to be tightened up. We can't protect every street, stop every rental truck from being rented, and stop every concert. But what we can do, I mean, these are symptoms of the deeper illness. And what we have to get in place is a broader strategy that gets at the ideology and undermines the ideology from a credibility standpoint. Why aren't we having disco bombings like we did in the 80s from communist-inspired groups anymore, which we had all over Europe? Well, because the ideology of communism no longer holds credibility and can no longer recruit. How do we get at that? Well, we can get at that with girls' education, with women's empowerment, with economic initiatives, with a number of efforts, and with a lot of the things that Green Berets are doing in terms of training local forces to take care of the problem overseas before it comes here to the United States. But it's that broader effort that undermines the credibility of the ideology itself. That's really the heart of the matter.
What can be done on the cyber part of this? Because that is actually growing, and I know you're very interested in that. In the time we have remaining, what do you think about that?
Well, look, one of the things that Comey testified about when he was FBI director is that just in 2016, there were thousands of devices that we couldn't crack into. Imagine the police forces not being able to get through a certain type of lock or into a house or into a car to search it. That's what's going on now with a lot of these devices and with a lot of these encryption apps. And I think the software companies and the tech industry needs to step up from a national security perspective and a little less worried about their bottom line. And I think an over concern about privacy here. There's a court process in place, but the technology now is outpacing our ability to get at those devices and to get at the software, and that's another huge issue.
And you also bring up the 702 reauthorization. We've got to get on that because that has to be done by the end of the year. So we'll keep in touch with you on that. Michael Waltz, thank you so much.
One more thing on Congress's plate. Yeah, sure.
All right, thank you so much. We are awaiting the White House briefing where we expect to hear a lot more about the terror attack, tax cuts. Plus, President Trump says one program in our immigration system may be partly to blame for the terror attack, and he's pointing the finger squarely at New York Senator Chuck Schumer.
23 people that came in or potentially came in with him, and that's not acceptable. So we want to get rid of chain migration, and we've wanted to do that for a long time.
Releasing the names of the victims of yesterday's attack. One of those killed was a 31-year-old mother of 2 children from Belgium. She was visiting New York with her mother and sisters. The others victims are 32-year-old Darren Drake from New Jersey, 23-year-old Nicholas Cleves from Manhattan, as well as 5 friends here from Argentina to celebrate their high school reunion. President Trump is taking aim at Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, the president tweeting, "The terrorists came into our country through what is called the Diversity Visa Lottery Program, a Chuck Schumer beauty. I want merit-based." And he had more to say about it earlier.
We want a merit-based program where people come into our country based on merit. And we want to get rid of chain migration. This man that came in, or whatever you want to call him, brought in with him other people.
Joining us now is Maryland Senator Ben Cardin, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, obviously the Senate. Sir, thank you for being here today. Do you have any initial reaction to the president's tweeting this morning?
Well, first, it's good to be with you.
Thank you.
Secondly, let's recognize that we do need comprehensive immigration reform. That's what the Senate passed 4 years ago. Senator Schumer was part of the leadership of bringing that bill to a successful vote in the United States Senate. It dealt with these types of issues by changing our immigration laws to make a lot more sense. Unfortunately, the House never took up that legislation. I think the president is wrong in the way that he's using this tragedy to highlight one of the problems we have on immigration. We should have comprehensive immigration reform. That's true. But that's not what caused this tragedy. What caused this tragedy is the fact that we need to, first of all, make sure that we use the best intelligence to deal with terrorism. This may have been a lone wolf. They're the most difficult for us to deal with. Our sympathies should be with the family, and we should pull together as a nation to make sure we're as strong as possible.
I know there's some frustration on Republican side of things when there's like the massacre in Las Vegas, where there's an immediate call for gun reform and politicizing that, and then the question of the president bringing up this diversity visa program. But I think what I hear you saying is that there would be a willingness by the Democrats to look at the diversity visa program, maybe within context of a comprehensive bill?
We did. We actually did away with that program during the comprehensive immigration reform bill that was on the floor in 2013. Of course, a good part of this is to make sure that we also fund programs adequately, whether they be immigration programs or counterterrorism programs. And when we look at the Trump budget, we need to work together, the Congress and the Trump administration, to keep America safe. And we shouldn't be trying to politicize these type of issues.
Let's move on to tax reform, because you gave the Democratic address over the weekend talking about how you want to have some sort of tax reform, but you don't think you can support the Republicans' bill as it's coming out. We don't have the details yet. But, sir, if the Republicans do include a high rate of tax on the nation's highest earners, do you think then that you might be able to support it, or other Democrats too?
Well, let me just tell you what I think it needs to be included for it to be acceptable.
Okay.
First, we don't want to drive a hole in the deficit. We don't want to continue to do deficit financing, to have to borrow money to give a tax cut. As I understand the blueprint, it's going to have built into it a $1.5 trillion additional increase in our national debt. That's unacceptable. Secondly, the people who benefit must be middle-income taxpayers. When we saw the original outline, it was skewed towards the highest incomes. And then third, there are specific provisions that we're going to be very concerned about. One, dealing with state and local tax deductions. That unfairly penalizes taxpayers in Maryland. We have over 40% of our taxpayers who take advantage of the state and local tax deduction. They shouldn't pay tax on tax.
There's a reason that tax reform is difficult, because they're having a difficult time on the House side, but it sounds like they will get it introduced tomorrow, and then perhaps there will be room for cooperation. If I could just ask you then a last topic about the social media hearings that are being held on Capitol Hill. One of your colleagues, Mark Warner, had some pretty strong comments for the companies. Listen.
Many of us on this committee have been raising this issue since the beginning of this year. And our claims were frankly blown off by the leaderships of your companies. Your first presentations were less than sufficient and showed, in my mind, a lack of resources, a lack of commitment, and a lack of genuine effort. Candidly, your companies know more about Americans in many ways than the United States government does.
Did you have a chance to see any of those hearings, and do you agree with Senator Warner?
Well, I think we cannot be naive about what Russia is attempting to do here in the United States. They're using a misinformation campaign in order to compromise our democratic system of government. They use our democratic institutions to hurt our democracy. So we need the help of the social media companies to work with us to protect their ability to advance technology and communication, but to protect our national security from threats such as Russia that use social media to bring down our free elections system.
My last question then, do you think that the election result would have been different and that Hillary Clinton might be president today if Russia had not meddled in the election?
I know that Russia is trying to compromise our free election system. I know that they use multiple strategies, including misinformation and trying to influence people's votes by what they put out on the social media in their misinformation campaign. We should protect ourselves against that type of an attack.
Okay. Maryland Senator Ben Cardin, thanks so much for being on the Daily Briefing.
Thank you.
Police and FBI agents zeroing in on the terror suspect's home in New Jersey, searching for clues to how he was radicalized and if he had help. Laura Engel is live in Paterson, New Jersey with the latest. Laura.
Hi there. Well, indeed, investigators have been very busy all morning long going in and out of apartment number 9 inside a 2-story brick apartment building behind me. We have seen a lot of activity, and in fact, the activity started very early this morning. Once the suspect was identified, and agents converged right here behind me to get into that apartment and the surrounding areas. We want to show you some video that we saw of a man coming out, an FBI agent coming out with a large garbage bag, presumably with evidence inside. They drove away, agents did, with that evidence as they had taken other things out of the house earlier in the morning. Now, Saipov reportedly lived with his wife and 2 children in this building, but not for very long. We've been told that he only lived here a couple of months. And so this apartment complex is important in terms of its proximity because it quite literally butts up against the back of the Omar Mosque, which he reportedly attended. Now, locals say that they saw Saipov frequently talk with people on the corner right in between the apartment and the mosque. It's really close, but no one really knew him all that well because, again, he had only moved into the area a few months ago. And while there have been some reports that he did frequently pray at the mosque, some members of the mosque say they had not really seen him before. Their community is coming together now to compare notes to see what they know about him. One thing they say everyone can agree on is that this act does not represent their ideals.
You don't just wake up in the morning and decide to rent a truck and plow into a bunch of people in any way, shape, or form. There has to be extenuating circumstances that are going to lead up to that, and that's not defending him in any way, shape, or form. I'm just saying that there must have been some sort of circumstance that made him go, to the left or to the right.
And while investigators say they think that he has been planning this attack for several weeks, they don't know why he chose this area in New Jersey. Why Paterson? Why this block? One of the many pieces of the puzzle investigators are working on putting together. Dana, back to you.
All right, Laura, thank you so much. So both sides of the aisle already saying that the terror attack is becoming politicized as Governor Cuomo slams the president for his tweets following the carnage.